What happened in that hearing room would change everything. One sentence, one number, one truth that couldn't be denied. It was supposed to be a routine oversight hearing, budget discussions, infrastructure spending, the kind of congressional hearing that C-SPAN broadcasts and nobody watches. But on this particular Thursday morning in Washington, something different was about to happen. The House Financial Services Committee room was unusually crowded. Reporters lined the back wall, sensing something in the air. Members of Congress filled every seat at the curved dais, and in the gallery above, tourists and staff members stood shoulder to shoulder, packed in so tight you could barely move. The air conditioning hummed loudly, struggling against the body heat of 300 people crammed into a space designed for half that number. It was humid, uncomfortable. The kind of atmosphere where tensions run high and patience runs thin. Senator Ted Cruz sat alone at the witness table. He'd been invited to testify about federal infrastructure spending in Texas. His prepared remarks sat in front of him, neatly stapled, barely touched. A glass of water stood to his right. His briefcase rested on the floor beside his chair. Cruz looked calm, almost bored. He'd done this 1,000 times before. But today was different. Today, Ted Cruz knew something that no one else in that room knew yet. He knew this wasn't about infrastructure. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez sat near the center of the committee dais, her nameplate gleaming under the fluorescent lights. Her phone lay face down beside it, but the screen kept lighting up every few seconds. Notifications, messages. Her staff had been working all morning, Cruz suspected, drafting statements, preparing graphics, getting the hashtags ready. The congresswoman from New York had been laying groundwork on Twitter for 3 days. Vague hints about holding power accountable, promises of speaking truth to power. Her followers were primed, energized, waiting. The progressive media apparatus stood ready to amplify whatever she said. Cruz had watched it all unfold. He'd seen this playbook before. The viral moment, carefully constructed, the righteous anger, perfectly performed, the victim narrative, already written before the first word was spoken. But today, Ted Cruz had brought something AOC didn't expect. Evidence! The committee chairman gavelled the hearing to order. The sound echoed through the chamber, sharp and final. Cruz was invited to give his opening statement. He thanked the chairman, acknowledged the members, and began speaking about Texas infrastructure needs, roads, bridges, water systems. His voice was calm, measured, almost boring. The kind of testimony that would normally put people to sleep. And then Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez interrupted. "Point of personal privilege, Mr. Chairman." The room shifted. You could feel it. Reporters straightened in their seats. Camera operators adjusted their focus. This was it. This was what they'd been waiting for. AOC's hand was raised, her face serious, composed. She looked like she was about to do something important. The chairman hesitated for just a moment, then nodded. The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from New York. AOC stood. She didn't look at her notes. She didn't need to. She'd practiced this. She looked directly at Ted Cruz, and her voice rang out clear and strong. "Mr. Chairman, I appreciate Senator Cruz coming here to testify. But before we discuss infrastructure, I think the American people deserve to know who they're hearing from." Her voice had that particular quality it always had during these moments. Controlled passion, rehearsed spontaneity, every word calculated for maximum impact. Senator Cruz talks about serving Texas, but where was he when Texans were freezing in their homes? He was on a plane to Cancun. She paused, letting the word hang in the air. He abandoned his constituents during the worst crisis they'd faced in decades. He left them in the cold, literally, while he went to enjoy the Mexican sun with his family. You could hear people shifting in their seats. And now he comes here to talk about spending their money? To talk about infrastructure? To talk about serving the people of Texas? She shook her head as if she couldn't believe the audacity. Senator Cruz claims to be a man of principle, but he takes millions from corporate special interests while voting against the interests of working families. He spreads conspiracy theories. He supported an insurrection against our democracy. And frankly, Mr. Chairman, I question whether we should be taking advice about serving constituents from someone who has shown, time and time again, that when the going gets tough, he gets going. to Cancun. Democrats on the committee applauded. Some even stood. A few staffers in the back started clapping too. AOC sat back down, satisfied. Her phone was already lighting up like a Christmas tree. The clips were being cut. The tweets were being sent. The narrative was being written in real time. Twitter was exploding. Cable news was cutting to the hearing. This was the moment she'd planned for. And Ted Cruz did something unexpected. He smiled. Not a big smile. Not a triumphant grin. Just a slight upturn at the corner of his mouth. The kind of smile someone gives when they've been waiting for this exact moment. When everything is going exactly according to plan. He reached down to his briefcase, the leather one he'd carried into the hearing room, the one that seemed a bit fuller than usual, a bit heavier than normal. "Thank you, Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez," he said quietly. His voice was calm, measured. "I appreciate your passion, and I was hoping you'd bring all of that up." He placed a manila folder on the table in front of him. It was thick, maybe 2 inches of documents, all neatly organized with colored tabs sticking out the top. "Because you see, I've spent the last 6 months having my staff compile a comprehensive record, public documents, financial disclosures, committee attendance records, ethics investigations, travel records, all matters of public record, freely available to anyone who cares to look. But I thought today it might be useful to have them all in one place." He opened the folder. Papers rustled. The sound carried in the silent room. "So let's talk about Cancun. Let's talk about corporate money. Let's talk about who actually serves their constituents and who just performs for cameras. Let's talk about hypocrisy, Congresswoman, because I have some things I'd like to share with you, and with the American people." The room went completely silent. AOC's smile faded. Just a little, just enough to notice if you were watching closely, and Ted Cruz began to speak. "At 8 a.m. on February 18th, we boarded a flight to Cancun. My daughters were scared. They were cold. They'd never experienced anything like that before. So yes, I got them somewhere warm. I got them somewhere safe. That's what fathers do." He looked up from the page directly at AOC. "We landed in Mexico at 2 p.m. Central Time, and by 6 p.m. that same day, power had been restored to our house in Houston. The crisis, at least for our neighborhood, was over. So I got back on a plane that night. I landed back in Texas at 6 a.m. on February 19th. Total time away from the state, less than 24 hours. And for the next week, I was in Houston, San Antonio, and Dallas, helping distribute water, checking on seniors, working with state officials to prevent future grid failures. All of this is documented. All of this is public record." The room was silent. This wasn't the narrative that had been written. This wasn't the story that had been told on Twitter and cable news for the past 4 years. "But Congresswoman," Cruz continued, his voice taking on a slightly different tone, "let's talk about where you were during crises in your district, because I think that's a fair comparison, don't you?" AOC shifted in her seat. Her chief of staff leaned over, whispering something urgently in her ear. She waved him away. "August of 2019. New York City faced one of the worst heat waves in decades. The temperature reached 103 degrees. 31 people in New York City died from heat-related causes. 12 of them were in Queens. In your district, Congresswoman, the people you were elected to serve." He pulled out another page from the folder. This time he held it up so people could see it, though most couldn't read it from where they sat. "Where were you during this crisis?" He let the question hang for a moment. "According to your own Instagram posts, which are still public, by the way, you were in Martha's Vineyard, attending a fundraiser at a beachfront estate. The invitation, which is also public record, listed the ticket price at $5,000 per person. $5,000. You stayed for 5 days." A murmur rippled through the room. Reporters were typing furiously now. "During those 5 days, you held 0 town halls in your district about heat relief, 0 press conferences about cooling centers, 0 visits to hospitals treating heat exhaustion victims, 0 meetings with constituents who were suffering. But you did post several photos from the beach. Beautiful sunset shots, very aesthetic." The murmur grew louder. "December of 2020, Cruz continued, not giving anyone time to process. COVID was at its peak. New York was recording over 1,000 deaths per week. Hospitals were overwhelmed. ICU beds were full. People were dying alone because their families couldn't visit. It was a crisis of historic proportions. Where were you, Congresswoman? Another pause, shorter this time. You were in California, filming a Netflix documentary about yourself. You were gone for 3 weeks, not emergency travel, not constituent services, a documentary about Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. AOC tried to interject. That's not fair. It is accurate, Cruz said, not unkindly but firmly. The production company confirmed the dates. Netflix confirmed the filming schedule. You were paid $250,000 for your participation. All of this is public record. I have the contracts right here. He tapped the folder. While you were filming your documentary, New Yorkers were dying. Your constituents were dying, and you weren't there. He pulled out a third page. July of 2021. Your district was experiencing a shooting crisis. Gun violence was up 300% from the previous year. 8 people were murdered in the Bronx that month alone. Families were terrified. Children couldn't play outside. It was a war zone in parts of your district. And on July 20th, you attended the Met Gala. The room erupted, not in applause, in gasps, in whispers, in the sound of people suddenly understanding something they hadn't understood before. Now, I don't begrudge anyone attending a gala, Cruz said, his voice rising just slightly to be heard over the noise. But let's talk about what that attendance meant. The ticket price was $35,000. $35,000? You wore a custom designer dress that cost thousands more. You spent the evening with celebrities and billionaires. You posed for photos. You went viral with your tax the rich message. And the next morning, when reporters asked you about the violence in your district, about the shootings, about the families who'd lost loved ones, you said, and I'm quoting directly here, you said you hadn't had time to review the crime statistics. The silence in the room was complete, total. You could have heard a pin drop. So yes, Congresswoman, I was gone from Texas for less than 24 hours during a crisis, and I came back. I came back and I helped. You were gone from your district for days, sometimes weeks during multiple crises, and often you didn't come back until the media attention died down, until it was no longer newsworthy, until the moment for political theater had passed. Cruz closed that section of the folder and looked directly at AOC. One of us abandons constituents, Congresswoman, but it isn't me. You could hear someone in the gallery drop something, a phone maybe, or a notebook. The sound echoed through the chamber like a gunshot. AOC's face had flushed red, bright red. She opened her mouth to respond, closed it, opened it again. Her chief of staff was pulling at her sleeve now, trying to get her attention. She ignored him, but Cruz wasn't done. I mention all of this not to be cruel, Congresswoman. I genuinely don't enjoy this. But you made this personal. You wanted to question my character. You wanted to question my commitment to my constituents. So I'm going to question your consistency, your integrity, your honesty. You set the rules of this engagement when you interrupted my testimony to launch a personal attack. I'm simply playing by the rules you established. He closed that section of the folder, his movements deliberate, calm. Then he opened it again to a different tab, marked in blue. Now you also mentioned corporate money, how I take millions from corporate special interests. I'm so glad you brought that up, Congresswoman, because I've been dying to talk about your relationship with corporate America. Cruz pulled out several more pages from the folder. He arranged them in front of him, side by side like a dealer setting up a card game. The papers made soft rustling sounds that somehow seemed loud in the tense silence. Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez has built her entire political brand on one central claim, he said, his voice taking on a professorial tone. She doesn't take corporate PAC money. It's on her website. It's in every stump speech. It's her signature promise, the thing that makes her different, the thing that makes her pure. And you know what? Technically, it's true. He let that word hang in the air for a long moment. Technically, you see, she doesn't take money directly from corporate PACs. That much is accurate. But let me explain to you and to the American people how the shell game actually works. Because it's quite clever, devious even, but clever. He picked up the first page. The Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, the DCCC, is the Democratic Party's main fundraising arm for House races. They raise money and they spend money supporting Democratic candidates. And they absolutely take corporate PAC money. By the millions. They take it from Google, from Amazon, from Facebook, from Microsoft, from Comcast, from pharmaceutical companies, from Wall Street banks, from every major corporation in America. And then the DCCC turns around and spends that money supporting candidates, including, very generously, Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez. He picked up another page. According to Federal Election Commission filings, which are public record and which I have copies of right here, the DCCC has spent $3.7 million supporting the Congresswoman's campaigns since she was first elected. $3.7 million. That's not a small amount of money. Now, where did that $3.7 million come from? Well, the DCC's donor list is also public record. Their top donors in the last election cycle included Google's PAC, which gave $350,000, Amazon's PAC, which gave $400,000, the pharmaceutical industry's lobby, which gave $1.2 million. These are the same corporations the Congresswoman claims to be fighting against. The reporters were typing faster now. You could hear the clatter of keyboards. So when Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez says she doesn't take corporate PAC money, she's playing a semantic game, a word game. She doesn't take it directly. She just takes it after it's been laundered through the party infrastructure, after it's been cleaned up and made to look more acceptable. But it gets better, Cruz continued, and there was something almost like amusement in his voice now. There are also progressive PACs that support the Congresswoman. Organizations with inspiring names like Justice Democrats and Brand New Congress. Organizations that talk about getting money out of politics. And those organizations, they don't take corporate PAC money either. They're pure. They're grassroots. He paused for effect. But they do take money from billionaires. The word echoed through the chamber. Justice Democrats, the organization that literally recruited Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez to run for office. They found her, they trained her, they funded her initial campaign. That organization has received over $4 million from billionaire donors, Silicon Valley entrepreneurs, trust fund progressives, heirs and heiresses, the same billionaire class that the Congresswoman claims to be fighting against, the same billionaire class she says is destroying America. Cruz picked up a third page, his movements still calm, still deliberate. And then there are the direct contributions, donations from corporate executives who bundle money together, CEOs, CFOs, vice presidents of major corporations. According to FEC records, Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez has received $890,000 in direct contributions from corporate executives in the last 3 election cycles. So let me add this up for you, Cruz said, his voice taking on that professorial tone again. Let me do the math because I think it's important that everyone understands the full picture. Direct spending from the DCCC on her behalf, $3.7 million. Support from billionaire-funded progressive PACs, $2.1 million. Direct contributions from corporate executives, $890,000. He looked up from the papers, directly at AOC. Total amount of corporate-linked money that has supported Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez's political career, $6.69 million. $6.69 million. The room was absolutely silent. Meanwhile, Cruz continued, I have taken $1.2 million from corporate PACs over my entire Senate career. $1.2 million. I'm completely transparent about it. It's disclosed on my FEC filings. It's legal. It's above board. I don't hide it. I don't pretend it doesn't exist. I don't play word games about where the money comes from. So the Congresswoman has taken $5.5 million more in corporate-linked money than I have. $5.5 million more. And she's built her entire career, her entire brand, her entire public image on lying about it. AOC finally found her voice. It was strained, higher than normal. That's a complete distortion of, is any number I just cited incorrect? Cruz asked, his voice suddenly sharp, cutting through her words like a knife. Silence. Is the FEC data wrong, Congresswoman? More silence. Is the DCCC donor list inaccurate? Are these not public records? Can anyone in this room go to the Federal Election Commission website right now and verify every number I just cited? AOC looked down at her notes. Her hands were shaking slightly. You could see it from the witness table. I didn't think so, Cruz said quietly. But he still wasn't finished. He pulled out another document, this one with photos attached. Let me tell you about the Met Gala. Let's talk about that in a bit more detail, because this is where it gets really interesting, where the hypocrisy becomes almost breathtaking. The Congresswoman attended the Met Gala in September of 2021. She wore a custom-designed white dress with the words, "Tax the Rich," written in red letters across the back. It was quite the statement. It went viral as intended. Millions of people saw it. It defined her brand for that entire year. What she didn't disclose at the time, what she didn't mention in any of her social media posts or interviews, was the cost of attending this event. Cruz held up a document. The ticket to the Met Gala cost $35,000. $35,000. That's more than half of what the median American family earns in an entire year. Just for a ticket. Just to walk in the door. The custom dress she wore was valued by the designer at $8,000. The handbag she carried cost $2,000. The shoes, another $1,000. Professional hair and makeup for the event cost $4,000. Transportation and accommodations in Manhattan cost another $12,000. He set the document down. Total value of gifts received, $59,000. Under House ethics rules, rules that apply to every member of Congress, including the Congresswoman, members cannot accept gifts worth more than $50 from any source. $50, not $50,000. 50. So this was a clear violation, an obvious violation. But Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez didn't report these gifts on her financial disclosure forms. She didn't pay for them at the time. She accepted them, went to the gala, became a viral sensation, posed for 1,000 photographs, and thought no one would notice. Thought no one would ask questions. But someone did notice. Someone always notices. The Office of Congressional Ethics opened an investigation. And you know what happened then? Cruz looked directly at AOC again. The Congresswoman suddenly discovered she needed to pay for all these things. Months after the fact, nearly a year after the event, after the investigation had begun, after her campaign had been contacted by vendors who hadn't been paid and were threatening to go public. He held up another document. This is the House Ethics Committee's final report on the matter, released just last year. It found that Representative Ocasio-Cortez violated House rules by accepting impermissible gifts. She was required to pay restitution, which she eventually did, months late, only after she was caught, only after there was no other choice. Cruz set the paper down carefully. But there's more, because there's always more. He pulled out another page. The Congresswoman's boyfriend, Riley Roberts, has been paid $6,000 per month from her campaign committee for the past 3 years. That's $72,000 per year, $216,000 total? For what services? The FEC filings listed as marketing consultation. What exactly is he consulting on? What marketing expertise does he bring? These are questions the Congresswoman has refused to answer, but the payments keep coming, month after month, year after year. And her brother, Gabriel Ocasio-Cortez, received $15,000 from her campaign for services provided by his LLC. Again, what services? The filing doesn't say, just consulting, a nice vague term that could mean anything. Cruz leaned back in his chair slightly, his hands folded on the table. So when the Congresswoman stands up in this chamber and questions my ethics, when she questions who I take money from, when she makes dramatic speeches about integrity and selling out to corporate interests, I want everyone listening to understand something fundamental. His voice was calm, but there was steel underneath it now. I follow the rules. I disclose my donors. I'm transparent about who supports me and why. I don't play games. I don't hide behind semantic arguments. I don't claim to be something I'm not. The Congresswoman breaks the rules, conceals the corporate backing her career depends on, pays her family members from campaign funds, and only tells the truth when she's caught, when she has no other choice. One of us has integrity. One of us is honest with the American people. He paused, letting it sink in. And it's not the one wearing the tax the rich dress to a $35,000 party funded by billionaires. The room erupted, not in applause, in chaos. Democrats were yelling objections. Republicans were shouting support. The chairman was gaveling for order, the sharp cracks echoing through the chamber like gunshots. And through it all, Ted Cruz sat calmly at the witness table, his hands folded, his expression neutral, waiting for the noise to die down. Because he had more, so much more. When the room finally quieted, when the chairman had restored some semblance of order, Cruz reached for his water glass. He took a slow sip, set it down carefully. Then he opened the folder to another tabbed section. Now, Congresswoman, he said, his voice cutting through the residual murmur, let's talk about the Green New Deal. AOC straightened in her chair. This was her signature legislation, her big idea, the thing she was most proud of. You could see her preparing to defend it. Let's talk about your vision for America's future, Cruz continued, because I think it's important that people understand what you're actually proposing. Not the Twitter version, not the soundbite, the actual policy. He pulled out a thick document. This is the text of House Resolution 109, introduced February 7th, 2019. The Green New Deal resolution. I've read it multiple times. I've had my staff analyze it, and I want to walk through what it actually says, what it would actually do. The estimated cost, according to the American Action Forum, is $93 trillion over 10 years. 93 trillion. With a T, that's not my number. That's not a partisan think tank. That's a bipartisan analysis based on the actual provisions in your resolution. He let that number sit for a moment. To put that in perspective, that's $600,000 per American household. The entire GDP of the United States is about $23 trillion per year. Your plan costs 4 times our entire economy, 4 times everything we produce as a nation. Where does that money come from, Congresswoman? Who pays for it? Because it's not the billionaires. There aren't enough billionaires. You could confiscate every penny from every billionaire in America, and you'd barely make a dent in that number. AOC tried to speak. That number is disputed and... Is it? Cruz interrupted. Then give me your number. What's your cost estimate? You introduced the legislation. Surely you know what it costs. Silence. Because you never provided one, did you? You introduced sweeping legislation that would reshape the entire American economy, and you never bothered to figure out what it would cost. Never bothered to explain how to pay for it. You just assumed someone else would figure that part out. He pulled out another page. Let's talk about jobs, because your plan doesn't just cost money. It costs livelihoods. It costs careers. It costs futures. Your Green New Deal calls for eliminating fossil fuels within 10 years. No more oil, no more natural gas, no more coal, just gone, eliminated. In the oil and gas industry alone, that's 10 million American jobs, gone. In coal mining, another 52,000 jobs. In auto manufacturing, at least 1 million jobs as we're forced to switch entirely to electric vehicles overnight. In the airline industry, 750,000 jobs because we can't figure out how to run commercial aircraft on solar power. That's 11.8 million Americans unemployed. 11.8 million people with no job, no income, no way to support their families, all in the name of climate justice. Cruz's voice hardened. And in my state alone, Texas, 89,000 people work in oil and gas. Average salary, $94,000 per year. Good jobs, family-sustaining jobs, jobs that put kids through college and pay mortgages and build communities. He pulled out a photograph and held it up, though most people in the room couldn't see it clearly. This is Miguel Hernandez. He's 42 years old. He has 3 kids. He works on an oil rig in the Gulf of Mexico. He makes $110,000 a year. He's been doing it for 20 years. It's all he knows. It's how he supports his family. Your plan puts him in the unemployment line overnight. And what do you offer him? The promise of a green job that doesn't exist yet. That might never exist. That certainly doesn't pay $110,000 a year. What does Miguel do, Congresswoman? How does he feed his kids? How does he pay his mortgage? What do you say to him when he asks why you destroyed his livelihood in the name of a theory? The room was silent again. That heavy, uncomfortable silence when everyone knows they're hearing something true. But let's talk about hypocrisy, Cruz said, his tone shifting. Because that's really what this is about. Let's talk about your personal carbon footprint while you lecture the rest of us about climate change. He pulled out yet another document. According to your campaign's FEC filings, you've spent $29,000 on Uber and Lyft rides in the past 2 years. $29,000. The Environmental Defense Fund calculated that as approximately 45 tons of CO2 emissions. 45 tons? Meanwhile, I drive a pickup truck. I've calculated my annual carbon footprint from transportation. It's less than yours. The guy you call a climate denier has a smaller carbon footprint than the champion of the Green New Deal. But it gets better, he continued. Multiple news outlets have documented you taking at least 6 private jet flights in the past 3 years. Private jets, while telling Americans they need to stop driving cars and eating meat. While proposing to eliminate air travel entirely. You've been photographed wearing designer clothing worth thousands of dollars. Fast fashion, which is one of the worst industries for environmental impact. You live in a luxury apartment building in Washington, D.C. that has no solar panels, no green technology, just standard electricity from the local grid, which in D.C. is mostly powered by natural gas. Cruz leaned forward. You preach sustainability while living like the worst kind of wasteful consumer. You demand sacrifice from working families while you sacrifice nothing. You want Americans to give up their cars, their jobs, their way of life, while you fly private and wear designer clothes and take Uber Black everywhere you go. Rules for thee, but not for me. That's your philosophy. That's always been your philosophy. He pulled out one more document. And let's talk about China, because here's what your Green New Deal actually does. It makes America completely dependent on China. China produces 80% of the world's solar panels. 80%. China controls 90% of the rare earth mineral processing needed for electric vehicle batteries and wind turbines. 90%. Your plan eliminates American energy independence. Energy independence we fought for decades to achieve, and replaces it with total dependence on the Chinese Communist Party. The same Chinese Communist Party that's committing genocide. That's threatening Taiwan. That's our primary geopolitical adversary. So when I ask who benefits from your Green New Deal, the answer is clear. China. China wins. China becomes more powerful. China controls the global economy, and America becomes dependent on a hostile foreign power for our energy needs. Cruz closed the folder section and looked directly at AOC. Your plan destroys American jobs. It makes energy unaffordable for working families. It enriches China. And it won't even accomplish its stated goal because China and India will continue increasing their emissions no matter what we do. It's not a climate plan, it's a suicide pact. AOC was shaking her head trying to interject. That's not... You're mischaracterizing. Then correct me, Cruz said sharply. Which fact did I get wrong? Where's my error? Because these are all public documents. These are all your words, your proposals, your policies. AOC opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. She had no answer. Cruz didn't wait for her to find her words. He moved to the next section of his folder, this one marked in red. Let's talk about your district, Congresswoman. The people of New York's 14th Congressional District, the Bronx and Queens. The people who elected you. The people you're supposed to represent. Let's talk about how you've served them. He pulled out several pages of statistics. Crime in your district since you took office. Robberies are up 127%, assaults up 89%, shootings up 203%, murders up 67%, 203% increase in shootings. Let that sink in. More than triple in your district while you've been in office. And what has been your response? You've called for defunding the police. You've voted against increased law enforcement funding. You've attended protests demanding fewer police on the streets. And you've remained largely silent as violence has consumed the neighborhoods you represent. He pulled out another page. Let's talk about Amazon. In 2018, Amazon announced plans to build their second headquarters in Long Island City, Queens. Your district, 25,000 jobs. Average salary, $150,000. $27 billion in economic development over the next decade. It would have transformed your district. And you killed it. His voice was flat, factual. You led the opposition. You celebrated when Amazon withdrew. You called it a victory for the people. You said you were standing up to corporate greed. He pulled out printed screenshots. Here's what your constituents said about it. Maria Santos, small business owner in Queens. She destroyed our future. Those jobs would have fed our families for generations. James Chen, unemployed at the time. I could have worked there. I could have supported my kids. Now I'm still looking. Those 25,000 jobs went to Virginia instead. Those billions in economic development went somewhere else. Your district got nothing, except your celebration. But let's talk about housing, Cruz continued, the documents piling up in front of him now. The thing you say you care about most, making housing affordable. Average rent in your district when you took office in 2019, $2,100 per month. Average rent today, $2,961 per month. That's a 41% increase in 6 years. 41%. You voted against 7 different housing bills during your time in Congress. 7. Why? Because Republicans co-sponsored them. Because working with the other party would hurt your brand. So you chose partisanship over your constituents' needs. You let perfect be the enemy of good, and rents kept climbing. He set those pages down and picked up others. Committee attendance record. You've attended 32% of your committee hearings. 32%. That means you skip more than 2 out of every 3 meetings where actual policy work gets done, where laws are written and budgets are decided. Town halls held in your district in the past 6 years. 4 town halls in 6 years. 1 every year and a half. Meanwhile, you've made 847 media appearances. 847 times you've been on TV or podcasts or interview shows talking about yourself, your ideas, your brand. You'd rather be famous than effective. You'd rather be on television than in your district. You'd rather be a celebrity than a congresswoman. Cruz pulled out what looked like a video transcript. I want to share something with you. This is a statement from Maria Gonzalez. She's 67 years old. She lives in the Bronx. She voted for you. She believed in you. He began reading aloud, his voice taking on a different quality, softer, more human. I voted for Alexandria because she promised to fight for us. She said she was one of us. She understood our struggles. I believed her. But my rent has doubled since she took office. My son can't find work after Amazon left. The shootings on our street are constant. I'm afraid to go outside after dark. And I haven't seen Representative Ocasio-Cortez in our neighborhood in 3 years. She's always on TV. She's always in the news. She's always talking about big ideas and national issues. But she's never here. Never. I made a mistake voting for her. She doesn't represent us. She represents herself. Cruz set the transcript down gently. That's who you're failing, Congresswoman. Maria, Miguel, Maria Santos, James Chen, the thousands of people who believed your promises and got nothing but Instagram posts and cable news appearances. He looked across the room at her. I represent Texas. I hold monthly town halls in different cities. I've visited all 254 counties in my state. I answer constituent calls. I work on legislation that actually helps people. I serve. You represent social media. You serve your brand. And the people who elected you are paying the price. AOC was no longer trying to look confident. Her face was flushed, her jaw tight. Her hands gripped the edge of the table in front of her. But Cruz still wasn't done. "Now, Congresswoman," Cruz said, his voice taking on an edge, "let's talk about January 6th, because I know you've been waiting to bring this up. You mentioned it in your opening attack. So let's address it directly. Let's talk about your lies." The room tensed. This was dangerous territory. "You've told a very specific story about January 6th, 2021. You've told it many times. On Instagram, on interviews, in speeches. A story about how you feared for your life, how you thought you were going to die, how you hid in your bathroom as insurrectionists pounded on your door. It's a powerful story. It's been shared millions of times. It's become part of the narrative of that day. Except for one problem." He paused. "It's not true." He pulled out a map and began describing it in detail. "The Capitol building is the large dome structure where the House and Senate meet, where the actual riot occurred, where rioters broke through windows and doors, where police officers were assaulted, where Ashley Babbitt was shot and killed. Your office is in the Cannon House office building, which is 2 blocks away, a completely separate building, connected to the Capitol by underground tunnels, yes, but a different structure entirely." He pulled out a timeline. "The Capitol was breached at 1:12 p.m. At 1:17 p.m., 5 minutes later, you posted on Instagram about your near-death experience, about hiding in your bathroom, about hearing pounding on your door. But here's the problem. At 1:17 p.m., rioters had just entered the Capitol building. They hadn't reached the Cannon building. They never reached the Cannon building. Not that day. Not ever." He pulled out an official document. This is the Capitol Police incident log from that day. It shows every breach, every location where rioters entered, every building that was compromised. The Cannon building is not on this list because it was never breached. Capitol Police secured the Cannon building within minutes. They evacuated some members to secure locations. They checked every office. There was never any danger in Cannon, not from rioters. Cruz pulled out another document, this one clearly official. This is a statement from a Capitol Police officer who was assigned to your building that day. Released just last year as part of the January 6th investigation records. I'll read the relevant portion. "Representative Ocasio-Cortez was never in danger on January 6th. The Cannon building was secured by 1:15 p.m. We informed her office multiple times that she was safe, that rioters had not entered the building, that we had the situation under control. The person knocking on her door was a Capitol Police officer conducting a security sweep. She was informed of this at the time." He set the document down. "The person pounding on your door, the person who made you so afraid, was a police officer. A Capitol Police officer. Doing his job, keeping you safe. And you've spent the last 4 years telling a story that makes it sound like insurrectionists were trying to break down your door. You knew it was a police officer. You were told it was a police officer. And you told the story anyway, because it was dramatic, because it was compelling, because it was good for your brand." Cruz's voice hardened. "Do you know who actually faced danger that day? Senator Mitt Romney. He was in the actual Capitol when the mob broke through. Security footage shows him running for his life as rioters came within yards of him. That was real danger. Capitol Police Officer Brian Sicknick. He died after being assaulted while defending the Capitol. That was real sacrifice. Ashley Babbitt. She was shot and killed while climbing through a broken window into the Capitol. That was real violence. But you weren't there, Congresswoman. You were never in danger. You were 2 blocks away in a secured building, and you've exploited their trauma, their real fear, their real sacrifice to elevate your own story, to make yourself the victim, to make yourself the hero of a story you weren't even part of. The room was completely silent now. You could feel the weight of what he was saying. And then, Cruz continued, his voice dropping lower, you compared your experience to sexual assault. You said that people questioning your January 6th story were like people who question sexual assault survivors. You weaponized that trauma. You used the real suffering of real assault survivors to shield yourself from accountability for your lies. That's unconscionable. That's beyond politics. That's using other people's pain to protect your mythology about yourself. AOC was openly crying now, not fake tears for the camera, real tears, tears of anger or shame, or both. So yes, Congresswoman, let's talk about January 6th. Let's talk about who actually faced danger and who manufactured victimhood for political gain. Let's talk about integrity and honesty and respect for the truth. Cruz gathered the papers together. You lied. You know you lied. The Capitol Police know you lied. And now everyone else knows too. Cruz stood up. It was a small movement, but it changed the entire energy in the room. He was no longer a witness. He was something else now. Something more. He gathered the papers from his folder, stacking them neatly, deliberately. Then he looked around the room, at the committee members, at the reporters, at the cameras. Mr. Chairman, members of this committee, American people, he said, his voice clear and strong. I didn't come here today to destroy a colleague. I came here to testify about infrastructure in Texas, about roads and bridges and water systems, about the unglamorous work of actually governing. But Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez decided to make this personal. She decided to attack my character, to question my integrity, to accuse me of abandoning my constituents while she was actually guilty of that very thing. He placed his hand on the stack of papers. This folder contains 387 pages of documentation. Every claim I've made today, every number I've cited, every fact I've presented, public records, FEC filings, ethics reports, travel logs, committee attendance records, news articles, video transcripts, all of it verifiable, all of it true, all of it available to anyone who wants to look. He slid the folder toward the center of the table. I'm making this available to the press after this hearing, not as oppo research, not as a political attack, but as a public service, because I think the American people deserve to know who their representatives really are, what they really do, how they really serve, or don't serve. He looked directly at AOC now. Congresswoman, you represent everything that's wrong with modern politics. The performance over substance, the celebrity over service, the social media brand over actual constituent work, the lies over truth. You built your career on being authentic, on being real, on being one of the people. But you're not. You're an actress playing a role. You're a marketer selling a product. And the product is you. His voice softened slightly, but the words cut deeper. I don't hate you. I actually feel sorry for you. You got famous so fast, you never learned what it actually means to serve. You got so good at performing that you forgot how to govern. You got so many followers that you forgot who you're supposed to be following, your constituents. This hearing was supposed to be about infrastructure, about the boring, necessary work of maintaining our country's roads and bridges. And maybe that's perfect, because infrastructure is what governing actually is. It's not viral tweets. It's not Met Gala appearances. It's not Netflix documentaries. It's showing up. It's doing the work. It's serving the people who elected you even when it's not glamorous or exciting or good for your brand. He picked up his water glass, took a final sip, set it down. So here's my challenge to you, Congresswoman. Go back to your district. Actually spend time there. Hold town halls, real ones, not performances. Listen to your constituents. Work on legislation that helps them. Show up to your committee meetings. Do the job you were elected to do. Prove me wrong. Prove that you're not just a social media influencer with a congressional ID. Prove that you actually care about something other than your image. He paused, letting the challenge hang in the air. But you won't, because you can't, because you don't know how. You've never learned how. And at this point, I'm not sure you ever will. You're not a public servant. You're a brand. You're a product. You're a carefully constructed image designed to generate clicks and donations and media attention. And the people of the Bronx and Queens deserve better than that. Cruz gathered his remaining papers, put them in his briefcase, and sat back down. He'd said what he needed to say. He was done. But the room wasn't done. The room was in chaos. AOC sat frozen, tears streaming down her face openly now. Her chief of staff was at her shoulder, speaking urgently in her ear. She shook her head once, sharply. Then she stood up abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. She didn't say anything. She just turned and walked toward the exit, her footsteps echoing through the chamber. Her staff scrambled to follow. Cameras tracked her movement. People stood to watch her go. The door opened. She walked through it. It closed behind her with a heavy thud that seemed to echo for longer than it should. She was gone. The chairman, who'd been sitting in the stunned silence this entire time, finally remembered his gavel. He struck it twice, the sound sharp and final. "The committee will take a brief recess," he said, his voice uncertain. But nobody moved. Everyone just sat there processing what they'd witnessed, what had just happened, how everything had just changed. And Ted Cruz sat at the witness table, calm, collected, his hands folded in front of him, waiting. 6 months later, the political landscape had shifted, not all at once, not dramatically, but definitely, unmistakably. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's approval rating in her district had dropped 17 points. 17 points in 6 months. Polling that would have been unthinkable a year ago now showed her vulnerable, potentially beatable. A moderate Democrat had announced a primary challenge. Someone local, someone who actually lived in the district full-time, someone who promised to hold monthly town halls and skip the celebrity appearances, someone who said what everyone was thinking. New York's 14th district deserved a representative who showed up. He'd raised $1 million in the first week. AOC's media appearances had decreased dramatically. The invitations were still coming, but fewer than before. And when she did appear, interviewers asked harder questions. They pressed her on the facts Cruz had presented. They asked about her committee attendance. They asked why she hadn't held a town hall in 8 months. She'd stopped responding to questions about that hearing. Her staff's official position was no comment, but everyone knew why. Because there was no good answer. Because Cruz had been right. The progressive movement had fractured, not completely, not irreparably, but noticeably. Some of her allies in the squad had distanced themselves quietly. Rashida Tlaib had been non-committal when asked to comment. Ilhan Omar had said, "Everyone has bad days." Cori Bush had said nothing at all. The silence was telling. Meanwhile, Cruz's profile had grown. His fundraising numbers had exploded. $4.7 million in the 2 weeks after the hearing. Conservative groups were using clips from the hearing in fundraising emails. This is how you fight back, they said. This is how you stand up to socialism. He'd been invited to speak at Republican events across the country. Young conservatives were studying the hearing, analyzing his technique. Stay calm, bring receipts, let them attack first, then respond with facts. The Cruz method, they called it. Presidential speculation had started, quietly at first, then louder. Cruz for 2028, the man who stood up to the socialists left in one. Not with anger, not with volume, but with truth. Conservative media played the hearing on a loop. Fox News had done 3 primetime specials analyzing it. The footage had been viewed over 200 million times across all platforms. It had become a cultural moment, a dividing line. You were either on Cruz's side or AOC's. There was no middle ground anymore. In New York's 14th district, something subtle had changed. You saw fewer AOC t-shirts, fewer bumper stickers. The worship had cooled. People were asking questions they hadn't asked before. Where is she? Why doesn't she hold town halls? What has she actually accomplished? Why did she fight Amazon? Why are our rents still rising? Why is crime still climbing? Maria Gonzalez, the woman whose words Cruz had read at the hearing, had become something of a local celebrity. News Cruz interviewed her. She always said the same thing. I just want a representative who represents us, not themselves. She'd endorsed AOC's primary challenger. The hearing had been replayed, analyzed, dissected, memed, praised, and condemned. But one thing nobody could do was deny what had happened. The facts were facts. The receipts were receipts. The video was video. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez had walked into that hearing room thinking she'd humiliate Ted Cruz. She'd planned it carefully. She'd prepared her attack. She'd warned her base to watch. But Cruz had been waiting. He'd been preparing longer. He'd been more thorough. And he'd been honest. She'd brought a performance. He'd brought evidence. She'd brought social media attacks. He'd brought FEC filings and ethics reports and Capitol Police logs. She'd brought her brand. He'd brought the truth, and the truth had won. 3 months after the hearing, AOC held her first town hall in over a year. The venue seated 300. Only 140 people showed up. Half of them were protesters. She tried to explain, tried to defend, tried to rebuild. But something had broken that day in the committee room. Some fundamental trust. Some belief that she was who she claimed to be. Ted Cruz, meanwhile, was in Texas, visiting his 254th county, shaking hands, listening to concerns, doing the unglamorous work of actually representing people. No cameras, no Netflix documentary, no Instagram Live, just service. The contrast couldn't have been clearer. In the halls of Congress, the dynamic had shifted permanently. When AOC entered a room, conversations paused differently now, not with anticipation, with caution. People wondered what she might say, what attack she might launch, what performance she might give. And they wondered if someone had receipts ready. Committee chairs were stricter about attendance. Members showed up more consistently. Nobody wanted to be the next person whose committee attendance record was read aloud on national television. Ethics disclosures were filed more carefully. Staffers triple-checked donations and gift reports. The casual acceptance of gray area gifts and payments had gotten a lot less casual. And when members considered launching personal attacks on colleagues, their staff reminded them, make sure you're clean first. Make sure your own house is in order. Make sure you're not guilty of the very thing you're accusing others of, because someone might have a folder. The hearing had become a case study. Political science professors assigned it to students. Communication experts analyzed Cruz's technique. Crisis management consultants discussed what AOC should have done differently. The consensus was clear. She should have checked his background first. She should have anticipated the counterattack. She should have known her own vulnerabilities. She should have prepared for the possibility that he'd fight back. But she hadn't, because she'd gotten comfortable, because she'd been treated gently by friendly media for so long, because nobody had ever really challenged her narrative before, until Ted Cruz did. And in doing so, he changed something fundamental in American politics. He'd shown that you could fight back, that you could challenge the progressive narrative, that you could win, not by being louder, not by being meaner, but by being more prepared, by having the facts, by telling the truth. It was a lesson that resonated far beyond that one hearing. It became a template, a strategy, a movement. The day Ted Cruz destroyed AOC wasn't just about one senator and one congresswoman. It was about accountability, about honesty, about the difference between performance and service. And it was about what happens when someone who's built their career on image finally faces someone who's built their career on substance. The image shattered, the substance remained, and everyone watching learned something important. In the end, facts matter more than followers. Truth matters more than tweets. Service matters more than celebrity. Always has, always will.